Dean Takahashi, lead writer for GamesBeat at VentureBeat. We're a tech news blog. We also put on conferences. We had our own GamesBeat 2012 conference a couple of weeks ago. I'm here with Michael McBride. He's the VP of product from Engimoco. And they are a part of DNA, as everybody here I'm sure knows. Michael, why don't you start just by talking about what you do day to day and what your job is?
So unfortunately, every day is different, but I run platform for Engimoco DNA, and what that means from a product and marketing perspective is everything that we do to support studios and developers to build games, iterate on them, collect data, improve monetization, get distribution around the world. And that includes everything from partnerships, engineering, building our actual platform and analytics services, to building tools like NG Core and our native SDK tools. So each day is a little bit different, but all of it is about making sure that we can actually get some momentum for our developers.
And not being a developer and a journalist, I get confused a lot about who is who sometimes in this business. And I wonder, what is a platform? What is a publisher? What is an app store?
So a publisher versus an app store versus a platform, I think there's probably a lot of gray area in how people typically think about it, but the way I think about it is an app store is an even playing field that is a distribution channel and awareness channel to try to get some reach for your game. But a publisher and a platform start to get a little bit more overlapped, where a publisher traditionally is trying to help you get that marketing reach. The differentiation I make with a platform is that a platform really is an ecosystem to which every developer contributes, but every developer also extracts a lot of value. So if you have 2,000 games in a platform, all contributing to deep analytics data, each one can actually benefit from that and try to drive the economics of the business significantly in their favor compared to what you could do on your own.
And there are, I guess, analytics firms and other folks sort of in the same kind of space, ad networks that take on some kinds of publishing functions. They almost seem like platforms themselves. So I wonder if that also adds to some confusion.
It adds to some confusion, and I think probably the biggest decision that a lot of developers consider is the fundamental of whether to go with a platform and the revenue shares that go with that, or to try to do all the investment on their own and cobble together some partnerships. And when you compare platforms to ad networks and other user acquisition channels, that's one component of what's in a platform, but they're all, in the big scheme of things, they're not independent. So a developer is either going to have to develop the expertise to pull all those together themselves, or rely on someone who has. And I think as an example, at DNA and Engimoco, we provide a game design advisor and producer to every one of our partners that we work with on the platform to help take all of the information that we gather from start to finish to actually improve the game. It's one thing to actually make great art, have a very entertaining game and product. It's another then to actually have that appeal to a very large audience, and then to actually reach that audience, and then finally convert that into a real business, have the systems and underlying game mechanics and analytics and iteration and event tools to make that a very highly monetizing product. So we tie together all of those pieces: user acquisition, analytics, the branding, game design, understanding your user base, so that that feedback loop can be very short and be effective at all those.
So most often people say DNA and Agree or DNA and Engimoco in the same sentence, I guess, and both are the billion-dollar companies in Japan with multi-billion-dollar valuations. They're both coming into the U.S. here almost at the same time. So how do you distinguish between your arch rival there?
Yeah, so in Japan, it's actually very easy. Everyone seems to know the difference. Outside of Japan, I think a lot of people know that there's four-letter words that are these Japanese platforms. And DNA's been around for a very long time. I have a lot of respect for what Gree's been doing. As a platform business, DNA really prides ourselves on having a very rapid and entrepreneurial approach to how we engage not only our developers but our own business to adapt. If you think about even what's happened in the last 6 months, a title that I would have thought was a huge success 6 months ago, and I would have popped the champagne for, knowing what we can get games to monetize for today, those are titles that I would actually probably cut if it was my own title. I would actually move my team to work on another game. It's moved that quickly. So I know that what we focus on is trying to make sure that every day we're taking what yesterday's excellence was and trying to turn that into the new basic, because it really is. And if you aren't on that cadence, both regionally and globally, it's very difficult to compete. I think one thing that GRI and DNA both talk about is that global reach. We have the Japanese heritage, but a lot of our growth is coming outside of Japan at DNA. We've had 20 plus titles on both first party and third parties in the #1 slots on iOS and Android, and that's for to #1 grossing, which is a really important chart to be on.
You guys may even define worldwide differently, I guess. How do you segment into different regions? And
so when we think about different regions, there's two perspectives. One is ours as a service provider and helping our developers to reach them. The other is when I'm talking to a developer and you think about what should my approach be to working with DNA to go global. And the first is to make a very compelling title for a particular market, ideally one that you understand very well. Because one of the services that we provide is not just global marketing and publishing and moving your game cross-border, but really making it successful in those markets. I think a lot of people traditionally think of localization as localizing language, but really it's localizing for culture. And in some cases that might mean something as simple as branding and language, but in other cases it might mean very deep studies that we typically do with our developers to understand exactly what the game mechanics are that are really working in the game, and then how that applies to a new culture. And so when we take games to Korea or to Japan or to China, we're not just localizing for those markets and making sure that we're integrated for bank and commerce with the different service providers there. For app stores, there's 24 in China. We aggregate all of those, so it's simple, but that doesn't mean your game's going to be successful unless we've made it resonate, and the emotional strings you're plucking in your core market are also plucked in China.
so some of the idea basically is to make what happened in Japan happen here in the U.S. too. What do you see as some signs of progress there, I guess?
So, this is probably one of the most watched things about DNA, and it's also probably one of the most encouraging. When I first started with DNA, I was not convinced we'd be able to reproduce the economics we see in Japan in the West. We have since been able to prove to ourselves that we can do that, and that's both with titles produced in the West and titles produced in Japan and other parts of Asia. We've been able to get those same results, and the things that drive those are all of the sort of variables in that equation of having high LTV users that cost less to acquire than they're worth. And when you put all the different things that go into that, the ingredients are the mechanics of the game. We've learned a lot from Japan that we have been able to prove works in the West. In some cases, that's been tuned for the culture here. But we've, even in the last 6 months, seen a very dramatic change in what is sort of very real performance in those titles.
There's been some interesting comments about how fast some of this is happening. I guess GRI's American chief was saying at E3 that, say, the battle for dominance in the mobile game industry will play out over the next 18 months. And then I mentioned that to Mark Pincus at Zynga a couple weeks ago, and he said that, well, he still thinks that mobile needs a triggering event in order to make that start happening. And he has this 90-10 rule, I guess, that they've achieved on Facebook, where they try to get to 10 million users with the game in 90 days. And they're regularly able to do that and invest $10 million and get $50 million back. So he says, until this triggering event arrives, that race doesn't really start, I guess.
So I think my perspective on that is, I agree that it's a very fast-moving market, but I definitely agree that it's probably going to take a little bit longer than 18 months to be done. There's a lot of growth. I think if you add up all the revenue in the West, you're looking at $5 billion-ish dollars. This is a market that could or should be 30, 40, 50 billion dollars. To get there in 18 months is pretty aggressive. But what Mark is referring to, I do think, is meaningful in that the inflection points that will make this much more efficient, we haven't reached those yet, and so that's what we provide and a lot of other companies are providing, and trying to provide preemptive tools to help fingerprint users, target the right users so that you're spending the right amount of money, knowing from a predictive standpoint what those users will be worth to you, so you can invest up front. We're pretty far behind the traditional internet in terms of our ability to track and tag and manage user acquisition campaigns. I think there will be some big events in the next 18 months where that will get easier as we get some more standardized approaches to user acquisition and mobile advertising.
Do you also feel like you're waiting for the platform owners to do things and to help the platforms mature? So like, do you want Google or Apple to do something more?
Google and Apple, right off the bottom, we have to say this has been fantastic what they've been able to create in terms of a marketplace for us to deliver our entertainment. In terms of areas where they can contribute, probably one of the key areas is for us to help figure out efficient ways to standardize on that user tracking. There's been a lot of discussion of Beauty ID and balancing privacy versus the economics of the industry. And we have to find a way to, while respecting those privacy rights, have a very efficient marketplace so that good titles that have a very compelling entertainment property can efficiently reach their audiences.
Are there any signals of where that's going to wind up?
No clear signals of where that's going to wind up. I think the clearest opinion is that it will end up in a place that works. I think the industry has common interests. Everyone wants to see a result in which we can efficiently market all of the applications, not just games, across mobile devices. And I think those incentives are strong enough that we will come up with a standardized approach, but it's going to take some more thrashing before we get to the final result.
How would you sort of describe what's in the platform right now? Like how full is it? How near really complete do you feel it is?
So from the perspective of complete in terms of delivering games successfully around the world, helping them iterate, it's very complete. In terms of where I want to see it be, we still have a lot of room for growth. The major components for our platform are mixed between human services and technology services. The human services are the game design support, the publishing and marketing support. The technology services, things like our big data analytics. We have one of the larger Hadoop clusters in the world. We invest very heavily in making sure that we not only understand historical data and can apply that, but being able to predict using those thumbprints and the large amounts of data that we have on 40 million users to accurately target. And you can imagine how compelling it is for your title. If you ship a game that your historical data says you might be on track for a $2 per user lifetime value, that's going to guide your marketing spend. But if looking at all the data, you can say, wow, based on all of the history we have, the sort of thumbprint of those users really looks like it's a $10 lifetime value. That's going to fundamentally change how you can invest in the growth of that title. So those types of tools and services that we provide can fundamentally change not only our developers' investment, but our own as well. We co-invest alongside our developers.
Mm-hmm. So you've had a success now with Rage of Bahamut. Can you tell us about it? Like, what's the sort of stats on that?
So for those of you that don't know, Rage of Bahamut is a title that's been out on Android for about 14 weeks. It's been on iOS for about 7. We've been the #1 top grossing app on Android for the last 13 weeks. The number 1 to number 5-ish on iOS for the last 5 or 6. And this is a title that was originally developed and published in Japan. It was very successful there. We moved it to the Western market and did do some cultural tuning, did do some event approach changes. We worked with our developer partner on that, and that title's now got over 2 million users. It obviously monetizes extremely well, and that's one of the titles that I think has helped to prove that what can work, and some of the mechanics that we used in Japan do work very well here. And that's not just to, I think a lot of people think of Japanese games as card battle games, gacha games. If you think about those mechanics, there's some core hooks in those mechanics that can be applied across many genres, and we're seeing that success when we integrate it well into many different genres of games.
What are some examples of some things that prove then, as far as the logic of the whole platform, I guess?
So the logic of the platform, when you look at events, for example, what we're doing is taking an investment in a live real-time sort of entertainment service. We're trying to make the game entertaining and change the context in which you're playing that on a daily or weekly basis. And how we improve those events and how we change the content and even in some cases introduce new game loops and game mechanics is all based on the analytics that we provide on a weekly basis, digging into how a user converts. When you look at those game loops, a lot of times you design a game, and even a game that maybe had some great mechanics that worked in Japan, it may be working in the West, but for different reasons. And it's critical that you actually understand what are the reasons that people are engaged with that game. Why are they actually coming back and spending money? The difference between someone spending money and leaving after 2 weeks versus spending maybe a smaller amount of money and staying around for 30, 40, 50 weeks, that's a very important difference because the total value of that user is much greater.
What are you doing for the live service now to keep it going, I guess?
So to keep it going for every title, that ongoing understanding of the users and how that feeds back into the loop is a regional marketing event. So when you think about that title, just as I was talking about moving it to Korea, Japan, China, other markets, the same way you're thinking about that initial move, you also have to think about how you're managing that game on an ongoing basis. So there is some feedback that has to be worked into a title if you do want to be global, to make sure that you're not getting too diluted. You have to make sure it's entertaining for the market that it's in.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody in the audience have some questions at this point?
Well, maybe I can start with a question.
Okay.
I appreciate it's different per title, but can you give us a rough idea of the breakdown between vanity items, content, and power-ups that people spend with their microtransactions?
So it actually varies a lot based on title. I kind of get back to that, what works in a title. You might see sort of an 80-20 ratio in certain titles. Sometimes it's power-ups, sometimes it's virtual goods. How the game loops are entertaining the user is typically what drives particular item consumption. And it's, I think, very important not to get too caught up in what might be considered a standard ratio. When you see the data about what people like in your title, don't ignore it, even if it seems strange. The users are right. They've found something they like, and you should dig into that and really understand how do we take that one golden sword that everyone seems to like and turn that into a whole broad portfolio of additional items that they may want to consume.
And
I think there's one down here.
okay, do we have a microphone coming?
So digging into the economics, what are the values you're seeing on ARPDAU in the US versus Japan?
So without going into hard numbers, we've actually gotten to the point where we can actually have parity in titles between Japan and the US. This is something that was not the case even 6 months ago. So we've made a lot of progress in terms of balancing those out. So I think you've probably heard numbers in the press in the past about what monetization can happen in Japan. And there was a lot of doubt as to whether that really could be possible. I think a lot of that was attributed to, well, Japan's a unique place, different culture, different mobile infrastructure, different use of mobile. You'll never see that monetization outside of Japan. That's started to be disproven, and I think to great comfort to us because it changes our investment capability dramatically.
Other questions? So I had one about just spending, I guess, on pushing titles. Gree has spent a lot of money this spring in the U.S. here, and somebody also mentioned that in Japan they advertise on TV as well. Do you guys have a similar or different approach here? And I guess some of the spending looks crazy on this sort of per title basis, but if you're trying to establish a strategic platform, then it seems you're almost like spending like Coca-Cola,
Yes.
There's no spending that's not enough, right?
You're absolutely right, and I think you'd be surprised to know that DNA and Gree are among the top and in many weeks and months the top TV advertiser in Japan. Surprising when you think that maybe Toyota would take that title. This is because that market has matured to a point that brand advertising actually converts. We know that the lifetime value of the users we acquire through that is a lot greater than what we spend on it, so we'll do it. Outside of Japan, I think DNA feels that we're still trying to heavily drive individual titles. So when we do marketing, we are marketing the title first and the platform second. And we're trying to make sure that the title is attracting as many of the users that are core to that title as possible. And that will include things like TV advertising when it's ROI positive. And we think about that equation every day. It's cost of user acquisition has got to be a lot lower than that lifetime value. And knowing what that lifetime value is to a very precise number allows you to tune that spend and sometimes be on TV.
Okay. We'd use one more question.
Thank you. I really appreciate what you have to say, and I was wondering if you could speak to potentially or speculate with the sort of increase of ARPDAU to these new levels, and as you mentioned, sort of new investment opportunities. How do you expect that to affect the market for, I think, most of everyone here, smaller independent developers, that simply that sort of new level of investment is well beyond our abilities?
So I would say first that level of investment really isn't beyond your abilities. That's why platforms exist, is to help you do that. And that's really in two ways. One is in providing the infrastructure and things that you might not otherwise be able to invest in up front, but also cash. We will spend marketing dollars to help support the growth of games up front. To almost act as a financing provider to make sure that we're actually capturing the market when that opportunity exists. So I think as a developer, the first thing to think about is how do I make a compelling title, and that's the art has to work for a core audience, and then how do I make sure that starts to appeal to as large an audience as possible, and we can help to do that tuning. And then how do you get the game systems in place to take what might otherwise be great ARPDAU and turn it to 3-4 times better? I think that it's a very valid question to ask us. Hey, I just joined. That's great. How are you going to take my ARPDAU from where it is to what you've been seeing in some of your other top games? And we have some very detailed answers to how we do that with game mechanics, and it varies game by game. But don't underestimate the level of investment you can put into a title when you start to get those things working. You get the appeal, you then grow the reach. The reach starts working. Make sure the game systems are actually working to monetize that. If that's working, that's when you can really start to pour a lot of money in the front end of the funnel.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you, Neil.
Okay, and thank you, Dean and Michael.